Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Lightner. Welcome to Don't IEP Alone, which is my simple little podcast about IEPs. So something that's been bothering me. I don't know. Maybe I overthink things. That's what I do. But I had reason to go to Atlantic City recently and spend the weekend there. My other son, my non-disabled child, had a basketball tournament. And so we stayed downtown, right by the convention center, right by the outlets, right right there where the ACE ends, if you're familiar with the area. And the way our schedule worked out was that we had a big chunk of time Saturday morning. We didn't have to be anywhere until 1 or 2 o'clock. So my son wanted to go over to the convention center with his friends, his teammates, and watch games, which of course was fine. I did not want to do that. I watch an awful lot of basketball, and I'm not that interested in watching people who I don't know play basketball. So I decided to go to the outlets and walk around. The first thing though was I wanted to see the ocean and the beach. If you live in this area, it's just kind of a thing where we go to the beach all the time or the shore, depending on where you live, what you call it. It's just kind of a thing to do in the summer. And for the past several years, we have not done it because I don't even think I've really been to the beach much since the pandemic. Kevin doesn't like the sand. He doesn't like the heat. We no longer have, we used to have this vehicle device called a WIKE, WIKE. I absolutely recommend it highly. If you don't know what one is, look it up if your child is smaller. Because Kevin outgrew his WIKE. I forget what the maximum weight and height is on it, but his legs are too long and he didn't fit in it anymore and he was too heavy and so it would sag down. But we loved the WIKE for getting him across the sand, so we could get him across the cushy sand and onto the flat part. He doesn't mind the flat part, but the sand, he's not having it. Anyway, for many, many reasons, we have not really gone to the beach like we used to. We used to go for 2 weeks every summer. So I hadn't seen the ocean in quite some time, and so I said, that I was going to walk up to the boardwalk and just kind of sit and look at the ocean for a while. Well, if you've not been to Ocean City, Atlantic City, it's kind of seedy. I do have a point. I'm getting to it. It's kind of seedy. If you don't know the history, for many, many decades in this country, like the only places you could gamble was Atlantic City and Nevada. Some places in Nevada. So if you wanted to gamble or go to a casino in this country, those were your two options. And of course, during that time, Atlantic City was very well populated and busy. It was a busy town, right? Like people went there, even though it did, of course, attract a seedy element to it. And you would hear all kinds of stories in the 70s and 80s of parents going to the casinos and they would leave their kids in the vestibule and things like that because kids weren't allowed in the casino, like really crazy stuff. Mafia type stuff, prostitutes, just a lot of seedy stuff. So then if you remember, it started that Indian reservations could have casinos, and then other states and cities were like, hey, we're going to have a casino. And now there's just casinos everywhere. And many states have casino apps where you can just gamble on your phone. There's sports betting on your phone. The market has become increasingly saturated, so you don't have to go to Atlantic City to gamble anymore in the East Coast. They've tried to reinvent themselves, the outlets being part of it. My son and I, my non-disabled child and I, we went to showboat a couple of summers ago when the new water park opened up, and it's a really cool water park. It's indoors. It's huge. It's a lot of fun. So we've done that. They've tried to build more like resort type hotels with spas and things like that, and attracting decent entertainment, which they do. They attract, pretty decent singers, and one of the people I saw advertised on a billboard was, like Kelly Clarkson. So yeah, so they get some pretty big name singers and comedians. But anyway, so I'm walking up. We were 4 blocks from the boardwalk. And, I looked at the map on my phone, and it was like, okay, if I just go straight up these 4 blocks, that would take me right to the boardwalk. And it was like maybe, I don't know, 10 or 11 in the morning. And it was weird because it was like, it just, I don't know how to explain it. It just didn't feel right. It just like, it wasn't that I felt unsafe, but I was, like looking behind my back a lot, because like these city blocks were pretty desolate for 10 or 11 in the morning, and it was a decent, sunny, breezy day. What we know about learning disabilities and mental health issues is that, and I'm not going to like bury you in statistics, but what we know is that people who do have mental health issues and or learning disabilities, dyslexia, things like that, that they tend to self-medicate, and the rate of addiction is much, much higher. The rate of being incarcerated is much, much higher, and things like that. So being learning disabled or having a mental illness, that by itself, because of the lack of supports in society, that very much increases your chances of, again, being in addiction or being in prison. So it's just kind of one of those things, like when I see people, like I saw this older guy walking, and he's just like pushing this big old shopping cart full of, I don't even know what the hell was in that shopping cart. And it was pretty warm out that day. Like I only had on a t-shirt and cropped jeans, and that really was plenty. And he had on like more than one hat and like all these coats and scarves and stuff, like really just kind of like this vagrant look to him. I'm like, I just like look at them and I'm like, like who failed you? Like who failed you? Because nobody like says when they're a kid, like, this is what I want for my end goal, or this is what I hope happens to my child. My son and I, well, I'll get to that story in a minute. So then I also was, so I'm like still walking up, and like the buildings in Atlantic City are just like weird, like because there's so many giant hotels and casinos that you could be walking on a city block, but like if you're behind the hotel or at the back end of a hotel or casino, it's like very industrial. Like there's going to be like a lot of dumpsters. It's not going to look pretty and things like that. And so I was at this one intersection, and it was like Michigan Avenue and I think Park Place. I'm like, of course. So I started thinking about Monopoly, and I'm like looking around and everything, and like Park Place was supposed to be like it, right? Like, isn't it one of the most expensive properties in Monopoly? Like, if you can get that, that's where you want to be. And I'm just thinking, like, this is not where I want to be. And then unfortunately I walked up. I was now like the beach block off the boardwalk, and I see this guy like huddled and there was like a stairwell with like 3 steps, and he was sitting there, and I could just see that he was literally shooting up into a vein in his ankle, right? Completely oblivious to what was going on around him, but he's like shooting up into his ankle, and he's like maybe, I don't know, 25 or 50 feet away from me. And again, I'm looking and I'm like, who failed you? Like, what happened along the way that this is where you are? And it just brought back a lot of memories, you know. So one time I was at a court hearing for one of my clients, and I was just kind of there as a character witness to discuss how the school had failed her and that she really was not being given the supports to be successful, because they wanted to send her back to juvie. And nobody gets better in juvie, right? You know that, right? That these are not rehabilitative and that most of the time they come out worse. So anyway, parents were no longer in the picture. Mom was incarcerated, dad was deceased, living with grandma. Grandma was pretty old and had diabetes and issues of her own. So I was there to argue, you know, again, that even though she had not been terribly successful out of juvie, that the school had not set her up for success and that what we needed was more supports and we were working on it and all that. But while I was there at the courthouse, and I live in a big county with 800,000 people, and so while I was at the courthouse, I ran into another client from a few years prior. And so mom saw me, and I just, like, when I saw her face, like, she just looked haggard, like, she just looked exhausted. Um, and the boy who was the student who was my client was sitting, like, maybe 10 or so feet down the bench from her. He looked, I don't know, he looked like some kind of something. And when I talked to mom, she had said that yes, he was now involved in drugs and he was making bad decisions, and he and some friends had broken into some building, and that's why they were there. Um, but I talked to her and wished her well, but he actually had quit school, so there wasn't even, you know, I tried the best I could to get him where he needed to be, and I thought he was in a decent placement. He was in a mental health placement, a partial day program, partial hosp. But I guess it, you know, I guess it didn't work. He quit, dropped out of school, and was not on a good path. The person who I was with, not my client, but there was also my client's case manager was there with us, and she was a very good case manager, cared, empathetic, you know, very progressive, trying to help kids, stuff like that. She asked me, she said, "Well, how do you know them?" And I said, "Well, they're also a former client." And she said, "Yeah, that kid's strung out on pills." She said, "I can tell the way he looks and the way he's acting. I've seen enough of it, but you know, they have a certain look that I guess I would assume that someone who works as a case manager in a juvenile detention center would be accurate when it comes to stuff like that, unfortunately." So it was just the my client at the time, I could tell you who failed her. It was her parents. Her parents absolutely failed her, and I won't get into the details. It was some really, really horrific stuff. Like, if you want to think about the worst of the worst, when we're talking about assaults and abuse, it was the worst of the worst. So that's who failed my client. The other client who was there, who wasn't a client anymore, and I think, like, well, who failed him? Like, his mom was there and she cared. Um, I I don't know. Like, how does this happen? Was it just the school that failed him, that made him think that he wasn't smart and that he wasn't worthy? Because mom didn't make him feel that way, and she was trying everything she could. So that's just kind of the stuff I think of when I'm a bleeding heart, if you haven't noticed that about me yet. But when I see folks like this, and I just think, like, who failed you? Because the school to prison pipeline is very real. The addiction pipeline is very real. Um, And so that's just kind of what I was thinking as I was walking around Atlantic City, seeing all these social issues. And I don't understand why we don't want to address them early in life when it can be addressed. We know what works. We know what works to help these kids. We know what works to serve these kids, and we know what works to improve outcomes. And yet we let so many of them drown and end up in prison and end up on the streets, quite literally. Living on the streets. So I won't make this all depressing. I could tell you a lot more stories of clients, kids, that curl your hair. I will say that very early on in my career, for the first many years, now this hasn't happened lately, but for the very first many years, all of my clients who were teens, that I got them as clients and they were already teenagers, every single one of them was already in the juvenile justice system when I came onto the scene. And I can tell you from very personal experience and what I've witnessed is that once a child is in the juvenile justice system, it is very, very, very difficult to turn that ship around. So parents, please do whatever you can to, if you start seeing a trend, you've got to engage and you've got to start documenting and you've got to start turning this around. And it doesn't start with an arrest and going to juvie. It starts with isolation and getting suspended and being treated punitively rather than supported. And it just evolves from there until it's more suspensions. And then, let's be honest, our society makes it much easier. It is much cooler to be the bad kid than the dumb kid, right? And I'm not saying that any of our kids are dumb. They're not. They perceive themselves as dumb sometimes if they're not supported, if they're gaslit, things like that. And it's much easier to be the cool kid who just gets into trouble all the time than the dumb kid who doesn't know how to read. So when you see things like that, if you start to see those trends, please do everything that you can in your power to turn it around. Because it's just sad to see, and our kids deserve better. They don't deserve this. Like, it's just weird to me that you can look at any kid with like ADHD or dyslexia or something like that, mental health issue, depression, anxiety, bipolar, and that we look at these kids once they're diagnosed and say, okay, well, now you have this diagnosis. Did you know that you're like 10 times more likely to do this and 50 times more likely to do that? Like, we don't accept it. We would never accept that for our non-disabled kids. Right? If I look at my non-disabled kid and said, did you know that you have a 7-time greater chance of being in prison than your peers? Like, that's like, we need to stop accepting this and say no. Say no. We're not standing for it. It doesn't feel like we can get anywhere right now, and I acknowledge that, but we can. We really can. We have to keep fighting for these kids because the alternative is that they're walking the streets of Atlantic City pushing a shopping cart, right? If we don't get them on the right path. So, yeah, that's kind of a weird podcast today, isn't it? I don't know. It's just been bothering me, and I don't know, maybe am I the only person who, like, thinks that when they see people, homeless people? And by the way, I don't do the whole unhoused thing. For a lot of reasons with a lot of different language, I have problem with fighting over language rather than trying to solve the issue, and I feel like unhoused is just a word that it's just weird. Like, really? Like, now, no. You know what will make homeless people feel better about being unhoused? Having a home. Not whether or not we've said unhoused or homeless. Pretty sure that guy I saw shooting up into his ankle does not care which word I use. So anyway, on that note, Book coming out this fall. It's on sale on Barnes& and Noble right now. If you go on Barnes& and Noble and search Lisa Lightner, it will come up. Other than that, I hope that you are getting ready to have a fantastic summer. Visit the beach, visit the shore, whatever you call it. Yeah, and have a great rest of your day.